Texas Governor Greg Abbott, how are you, sir?
Mark, I am doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I don't think we've ever had an opportunity to speak, but I want you to know how impressive you are. I've been watching you from afar, and you definitely caught my attention on Article 5, Convention of States. I want you to tell the audience all over the country, what is it that led you to begin to lead this fight?
Well, my pathway is different than yours, and first I applaud you on taking the leadership mantle in pushing Article 5 across the country. But my pathway began different from yours because before I was governor of Texas, I was the Attorney General of Texas, and I filed more than 30 lawsuits against the President of the United States of America, challenging what I thought were overreaching, unconstitutional, illegal actions. And so I've seen this from the courtroom firsthand, and through that process, and having lost some of those cases, I realized, you know what, a lawsuit is only going to take us so far. And now that I am the executive for the state of Texas, I realize there has to be a different and better pathway. And Mark, another thing is that as your listeners are considering who they're going to vote for president in the upcoming election, they're probably thinking they're going to choose someone who's going to be able to change our country. You and I both know that's simply not true under the way the United States Supreme Court and Congress are currently applying our congressional and judicial branches of government, regardless of who the president may be right now. We have to institute changes from the bottom up that returns the Constitution back to its original intent.
You're so right. We have structural problems here, structural problems that no one man or woman as president can fix. How does a president fix the Supreme Court? How does a president really get their arms around the massive bureaucracy? How does a president force Congress to balance the budget? And how many years do we have to wait until this gets done? Let me ask you something, Governor. Why are people so afraid of this process? It's right in the Constitution. All the states are doing is proposing amendments to other states. There has to be generally subject matter agreement. I don't even understand when people say a runaway process. The runaway process is in Washington.
Well, you're right, and the fear and concern was one of the issues that delayed my involvement in picking this up and running with it, because I really wanted to get my hands around it, because I had heard a lot of people raise fears and concerns about a runaway convention, et cetera, et cetera. So I really dug into it, and there were two things that were compelling to me. First, is the realization of the genius of our founders. They knew back in 1787, and they articulated it at the Constitutional Convention, as well as in the Federalist Papers, the need for future generations of Americans to be able to amend their Constitution through the Article 5 process. And so who are we to say that the geniuses who wrote the Constitution are somehow, less smart as we are right now, that somehow the genius of the people of the United States is overriding that original intent of the United States Constitution. But the second thing is that when I realized that regardless of what proposals are going to be raised, and it's something that you and I hear all the time, and that is, well, gosh, who knows what's going to happen when you get into that convention? The reality is there will have to be a gathering of support that will achieve 3/4 of the states in agreement on whatever that provision may be. Now, that may not be everything that we need to do to return the Constitution to its original intent, but I think that we will be able to get 3/4 of the states to agree on several fundamental principles that will correct a runaway, uncontrollable, and unaccountable Congress and federal government.
And can you imagine, even as this force grows, and it's going to grow, and how is Congress going to respond? The president going to respond? I think we're going to grab their attention. They're going to go, uh-oh, wait a minute. If we better be careful. We better start thinking about this, or else.
And that's exactly what happened, as you know, with regard to some of the other amendments that have passed through the first part of Article 5 in the past. And that is amendments that were brought up through Congress itself, and because Congress realized, wait a second, the people are onto something here. They're pushing something here. We better get out in front of this train and pass it ourselves. And so regardless of what force causes these actions to occur, I think there is a growing agreement across the country about the necessity to make certain alterations in our government, because not because our Constitution as it was written is flawed, but because our Constitution as it has been applied is flawed.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, people will say, well, what makes you think the federal government will change? Well, the answer is, and the proposals you've made and I've made, and people will work all that out, because the power moves back to state legislatures. That's why it's not so much whether the federal government will comply. The states have a decision to make.
Right, and it's very simple, and that is you don't have anything to fear if you're unless you're convinced that Washington knows what's best for you. I think we've learned time and again Washington does not know what is best for us. You know what's best for you, and your ability to influence your life is getting more and more complicated because of the complicated way in which the federal government is operating. And that is converse to the way that our founders intended it. Our founders intended this to be a country that is run by the people. And the best way that people can do that is by having some sway in their elected officials taking action consistent with the people. And the best way to do that is at the state level as opposed to Washington, D.C. But let me add this, because I know you know this, but your listeners need to understand, and that is the way the Constitution was written. It was written for Congress, our elected representatives, to be the ones who are going to pass the laws that govern our lives. The fact is that less than 10% of the laws that govern our lives are written by the United States Congress. Most of them are written by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And they usually issue that stuff on Thanksgiving or New Year's Eve or something like that. Now, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who we're talking to, he's putting his shoulder behind this movement. So what now happens in Texas? What are you going to do to try and get something through the Texas legislature?
Two things. One is my job is to ensure we get this passed through the Texas legislature. When I gave that speech that you made reference to, it was very persuasive to me that as I was leaving the stage, representatives and senators walked up to me and said, I want to carry the bill. I want to carry the bill. I want to be involved in this. I want to support this. And so this is clearly something that I think the Texas legislature is going to embrace. So in addition to working to ensure this passes through the Texas legislature, my job is also to begin the process of working with my fellow governors as well as legislators across the entire country to help them understand there is really nothing to fear about this process, that this really is dovetailing into the genius of our founders, and this is ensuring that we get our country back on the right pathway. And so I will be urging other states to join Texas, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Alaska, and other states who are calling for a convention of states.
You know, Governor, Marco Rubio has become a prominent, outspoken supporter of this. Mike Huckabee. Some of the other candidates have mentioned that they like the idea. Don't you hope this at some point comes up during one of these debates rather than some of these silly questions so we can start talking about the Constitution and start persuading the American people?
It does need to come up because the voters have a right to know where these candidates stand on this issue. Do they stand in favor of a process that is going to restore the rule of law that we have in this nation, or are they going to perpetuate a flawed big government system in Washington, D.C.?
And even though a president has no control over the process, or a governor has no control over the process, you can prod, you can push, you can persuade, you can do all the things that a chief executive does to try and influence the public and influence the legislative process, correct?
That's what leadership is. And that's what I decided to do. And that is after I had thoroughly researched the issue, after I was thoroughly convinced that, A, this is the right pathway, and B, that there were no valid fears behind doing it. In fact, it's almost a no-lose proposition. There is nothing to lose because all it takes, as you know, is 13 states to be able to block any type of runaway convention that would undermine a precious right that we hold dear. And so if we can't cobble together 13 states to block any damage, then we're in a lot more trouble than we think we are.
Then it's over, isn't it? It really is.
Exactly. But at the same time, think about this prospect for your listeners across the entire country. I know there are people in, let's say, North Dakota or South Dakota or pick some other small state. They are fed up about having their lives run by congressmen from California and New York and places like that. Well, guess what? As you know, in a convention of states, the one vote that North Dakota gets is just as powerful as the one vote that California would get. So now we have an opportunity where every state is on equal ground. We all have a say. We all have the right to take our country back down the pathway that our founders intended it to go.
You know what else, Governor? You have people, constitutionalists, liberty-loving people in these dark blue states. This gives them an opportunity, too, because if Texas or some of the other red states participate in this and push this so forth, the fact that they don't live there nonetheless means that you do now finally are getting some kind of representation. You're not getting it in Washington. You're not getting it in your state capital. But here the states are coming together.
Well, you're exactly right, but I want to expand on that a little bit, and that is you talked about liberty-loving citizens in blue states. I want to talk about liberty-loving patriots in red states, because I hear this all the time about people who say that they believe in liberty, they believe in the Constitution, and just enforce the 10th Amendment. The reality is the 10th Amendment was long ago abandoned by the United States Supreme Court, and it's in a condition right now that is unenforceable. If someone believes in liberty, if they believe in patriotism, if they believe in the fundamental foundational principles of this country, they cannot be afraid of this. They must embrace this and push this and join with us on this.
That is so right, because what you're saying is we've got to convince our own folks first, so then we can build this army and persuade legislators. Because before you announced her, we used to get calls that there's one man or one woman, the president of the state senate in Arizona or the speaker of the House of whatever state, blocking even consideration on the floor of their legislature. That can't go on. I mean, if that goes on, that means the people's will is never going to be recognized.
Well, I think that calls upon all of us and your listeners to do two things. One is to lead by reaching out to these officials and educate them. And for all of your listeners who are citizens in various states across the entire country, they need to demand that their state representative, their state senator, their governor embrace this Article 5 solution. This is a solution that you didn't invent, I didn't invent. It was our founders who invented it. The same Hamilton and Madison that passed the rest of the Constitution, they passed Article 5 of the Constitution. They had the genius and foresight to realize we needed this tool. And we are making a mistake by not using the tool that was handed to us by Hamilton, by Madison, by Ben Franklin.
Well, you're doing an outstanding job, and your plain-spokenness and substance and so forth is very impressive. I'm very excited about your leadership in this, Governor. And if there's anything I can do, let me know, and we're going to have you back if that's okay.
We have to continue to spread the word. We have to win this battle, and I think that there is an urgency. I think it needs to be done and achieved in the next 2 years. Which may seem like a long time, but in the process of getting things like this done would be lightning speed. But we've seen the way the United States Supreme Court will strip away our liberties or fabricate new rights in the Constitution. Think about this. One last thing, and that is, how many amendments do we have to the United States Constitution? And most people will say, well, about 27. The fact is, you know as well as I do, that the United States Supreme Court amends the Constitution every single year. And the people have no say in that, no right in that, and their lives are altered by just 5 black robes in the United States. That's not the Constitution that Madison created. We need to return this country back to its foundational principles, and we'll work every single day to get that done.
That's just great. You're great. Now I'm going to be walking in a better step when I go get my steak sandwich tonight. You know that?
Well, you need to come to Texas sometime, Mark.
Well, you're right. I do. Maybe I'll come down there and visit you one of these days, if that's okay.
I look forward to it.
Well, God bless you, Governor. Terrific job. We can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Governor Greg Abbott.